Well, welcome back, folks. This is Dr. Rob, the movie NP, here to review movies for you and provide you with the success tips, life hacks, and lessons that we can learn from these films. Tonight's movie review is going to be Zootopia 2, released in 2025, carries a rating of a PG. It is 1 hour and 48 minutes long, carries an IMDb rating of 7.7 out of 10, and a Rotten Tomatoes rating of 92%. It is written by Jared Bush, directed by Jared Bush and Byron Howard. It stars Jennifer Goodwin as Judy Hopps, Jason Bateman as Nick Wilde, and Ki Hai Kwan as Gary D. Snake. So the synopsis of the film, folks, is the film starts about a week after the original film, Zootopia, and Officer Hopps and Wilde continue to struggle to be taken serious as police officers. They're ridiculed and they're given menial jobs. However, Officer Hopps has a different idea and decides that her and Wilde are going to go undercover to bust a dock boss who is smuggling illegal goods. This ends up pulling them down into a conspiracy where there are nefarious forces that are more than happy to kill to keep their secrets safe. Key themes of the film are personal growth, partnerships, and relationships. Also looks at discrimination, prejudice, systemic exclusion, and othering. It also argues that a healthy society and peoples value differences versus discrimination, and takes a deep look at history, truths, and rewriting false narratives. I like history, and the film really reminds me of J.P. Morgan, Thomas Edison, and Nikola Tesla. Unfortunately, it is well known that Edison stole patents. He actually was paying off people in the patent office to notify him when patents got submitted, and if it looked good, he would get a call, and he would interestingly submit the patent minutes before the original individual submitted that patent. J.P. Morgan backed both Edison and Tesla, but unfortunately, when J.P. Morgan came to believe that Tesla's intent for his inventions was to give away free electricity to everyone, he began a smear campaign that discredited him in the public eye. In fact, the whole notion of the mad scientist that we hold today comes from this smear campaign. So, spoiler alert, here's a quick scene by scene review of the film. So, like I previously stated, the film begins about a week after the original film, and Hopps and Wilde continue to be ridiculed and they're given menial jobs. So, Hopps decides she's going to defy orders and go undercover to bust this dock boss that is smuggling illegal items into the city. While this is all going down and this police chase goes down, we see that a snake escapes an enclosure and disappears. Officer Hopps notices this and sees the snake skin left behind, and she makes a mental note of this. At this point, we begin to see news stories about the 100-year celebration of Zootopia and how there's going to be this huge gala where this Linksley journal is going to be on display. Coincidentally, it's also mentioned in these newsreels that there's not been a snake seen in Zootopia for 100 years, and this all culminates around an interaction where there was a snake attack on Ebenezer Linksley's maid, and because of that, all the snakes were exiled. So, with keeping the snake sighting in the back of Officer Hopps's mind, she begins seeing other news stories and notes a conspiracy theorist who has a blog called Nibbles Maple Sticks, who begins talking about all this conspiracy behind the Linksley family and the snakes and reptiles. This leads Officer Hopps to believe that there's going to be an attempt to steal the Luxley journal that's on display during the gala. So Officer Hopps and Wilde go undercover to the gala to try to thwart any effort of this journal being stolen. Unfortunately, they can't act quick enough, and the journal is stolen by the snake. So Officer Hops and Wilds take up pursuit, and they do corner the snake, where he pleads with them to let him go because there is a secret message in this journal that is going to clear his family's name and bring them home. About the same time, Chief Bogo shows up, and moments later, so does the Luxley family. Unfortunately, during all the confusion and skirmish, Chief Bogo is accidentally bit by the snake, which of course injects his deadly venom in. Unfortunately for Officer Hops and Wild, the Luxley family decides to frame them and reports that they are helping the snake. Moments later, the snake gets away with the help of a mysterious individual on a motorcycle. Officer Hops and Wild also escape, but are quickly picked up by a couple of goons and thrown into the trunk of their limo. The limo drives away, and the next scene is we see Hops and Wild being pulled out and presented to Mr. Big. Mr. Big tells them that he likes them, and as a result, he wants to help them because once you go up against the Lynx family, if you try to go against them, you're going to end up dead. So he offers to give them fake identities and safe passage out of Zootopia. Nick instantly wants to take their offer, stating that it's not worth dying for, whereas Hops argues against this and says that she must help. She realizes she needs to find some reptiles to help make sense of all this and asks Mr. Big for help. With its, Mr. Big decides to help them by introducing them to none other than Nibbles Maple Sticks, the conspiracy theorist. So Nibbles decides to help them by taking them to a swamp, basically a seedy part of town, where the reptiles congregate to keep a low profile from everyone else. During these scenes, Gary shows up and he successfully gets the journal off of Hops and then makes an escape. Hops and Wild, of course, take up pursuit again and end up in the middle of nowhere. Following the pursuit, they do catch up with the snake, but unfortunately, Hops and Wild get separated. Hops ends up with the snake and his mysterious helper, who ends up being Paubert Linksley, the black sheep of the Linksley family. Officer Hops learns that the snake's name is Gary, and also that he's a pit viper who has heat sensing vision. They figure out that they have to put the journal in the fire to reveal the hidden symbols or the hidden message that he's looking for. So they place the book in the fire, and Gary is able to decipher the symbols on the cover of the journal. So while all this is going on, Gary tells us what really happened in the past. He tells us that his grandmother or great grandmother, Agnes, is the one that actually invented the weather walls that created Zootopia. However, Ebenezer Linksley was her financial backer, and he became greedy and decided to steal the patent out from under her and then staged the snake attack and framed Agnes for the attack. We discover through the hidden symbols on the journal that the proof that Agnes invented the weather walls and filed the first patent is hidden in her home. Unfortunately, the home has been buried under tons of snow and ice that the Luxley family intentionally created. So the rest of the film is a mad race between Hops, Wild, and Gary and the Luxley family to reach the patent first, to either prove the patent or to destroy the patent forever. So, what are the success tips or life lessons that we can learn from Zootopia 2? Well, here they are. Success tip number one is to embrace inclusion and reject stereotypes. The notion here is growth only occurs when we learn to evaluate individuals based on who they are and their actions and not as a group. Unfortunately, bias blinds us and can often lead us down the wrong path. And here's a quote from Maya Angelou that states prejudice is burden that confuses the past, threatens the future, and renders the present inaccessible. The notion here is that ethical leadership is using a platform to protect those that don't have one. Nick has a line in the film that states, "We don't get to stay comfortable if others aren't safe." And unfortunately, I get to see this every day with the injustices and marginalization around those that with substance use disorder and the homeless. One of my favorite quotes here is from the song Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie that states, "Why can't we give love one more chance? Why can't we give love?" And the refrain is, "'Cause love's such an old fashioned notion, and love dares you to care for the people on the edge of the night, and love dares you to change our way of caring for ourselves." Success tip number 3 is to value the strength that diversity brings. Different strengths and viewpoints makes teams more effective and efficient. And I think we've seen this quote before, but I have an excellent quote from Helen Keller that illustrates this that states, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." This reminds me of another film. The film is called Cube from 1997. And what the plot of this film is these individuals wake up and they're imprisoned in this cube, which ends up being this multi-level moving puzzle of sorts that they have to find their way out. And there's all these booby traps. So we find out that the individuals that are in the cube, none of them know each other, but they've all been chosen for a reason. One is an autistic savant. Another one is a thief slash escape artist. Another one is a cop. Another one is an engineer. And another one is a medical doctor. And what we see through this film is that each stage of their escape builds on each other's individual strengths. And I find this to be true in life and in our careers. Case in point, it's often good to go to different schools for your undergraduate, your graduate, your doctorate, because each time you move schools, you get to see things from a different viewpoint and the cultures involved in those organizations. So the key here is by moving to different schools, we get a completely different perspective from their culture that might better prepare us for the future than this staying with one organization and one culture through your entire academic career. Success tip number 4 is do not abandon hope because systems are flawed. Systems are always going to be flawed. It's the individuals that are involved in those systems that either make them or break them. And studies have been done to show that hope leads to greater resilience. Hope also leads to being better at managing stress and negative emotions. And there are quite a few studies that show that in academia, the students that went into tests having hope outperformed those that went into the tests without hope. And here's a quote from Desmond Tutu that states, "Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness." Success tip number 5 is being willing to re-examine your own beliefs. There's a line in the film that illustrates this very well that states, "Maybe what we thought was true wasn't the whole story." This really brings me back to the X-Files. I was a big fan of that show. And one of the catchphrases for that show was question everything. And if we take a deeper look, we find that Fox Mulder was driven by childhood trauma, guilt, and the abduction of his sister. So you can see a common thread that ties a lot of this together. And if Mulder would not have had hope, then he wouldn't have been able to be the hero of the show in most of the episodes. And here's a quote by Albert Einstein that states, "The measure of intelligence is the ability to change." As we grow in our lives and careers, we have to be able to take a step back, reevaluate things, and question our own beliefs. And as new data comes in, incorporate that new data into our belief system. Success tip number 6 is to use creativity, humor, and empathy to navigate conflict. Humor often diffuses tension and opens the lines of communication. There's a quote in the film that says, "Sometimes a laugh opens doors that a lecture can't." And a quote by Mark Twain is that humor is mankind's greatest blessing. This is one of the reasons why I really love the Chappelle show. I think that guy is often misunderstood. What he's really doing is he is using comedy to break down walls and allow us to see our similarities over our differences. And I really find that he is gifted at doing that, using the tool and the gift of comedy. Success tip number 7 is don't let fear or social pressure stop you from doing what's right. And this is a huge one. And I'm going to give a huge soapbox warning here. The underlying notion is that doing what is right is rarely comfortable, but is always necessary. The quote in the film that underlines it is, "If we back down now, fear wins." So here's the soapbox warning. This really reminds me of the Challenger disaster. If anyone out there has not seen the documentary Challenger, The Final Flight, which is available on Netflix, y'all have to check this out. This is a huge eye opener. Unfortunately, I was there. I was in, I think, 7th grade. We were all brought down to the cafeteria to see this whole presentation of the Challenger launching. And we all watched live on television the Challenger blowing up. So that's what the documentary is about. What happened and how could this tragedy occur? And unfortunately, I'll just cut to the chase and give you the spoiler alert here is, as we know, during the investigation, they found out that it was the failure of the O-rings that kept the fuel from igniting. Those O-rings failed because it ended up being a very cold day, and those O-rings were simply rubber. So, because of the unprecedented cold weather that occurred down in Florida that day, those O-rings became very brittle, which allowed for gases to escape around them, leading to the mixing of gases that should not be mixed, which of course led to the explosion and the destruction of the Challenger. But that's what we know after the fact. But the documentary goes into what we know before the disaster happened. And unfortunately, what the documentary suggests is that NASA was very much aware of the failure of the O rings and that a disaster was possible. So, how does this tie into don't let fear or social pressure stop you from doing the right thing? Well, because what happened was the engineers who realized that there was a problem brought it to management's attention, in which management decided that, oh, we're going to vote whether we're going to let this slide or whether we're not. And unfortunately, management overrode the engineers and decided to launch the Challenger without fixing it. So there's several reasons for this, but the primary one is that the budgeting for NASA was currently up for discussion in Congress, and NASA felt that if they halted the program to fix the problem and repair these O-rings, that Congress would pull their funding. So in the documentary basically villainizes NASA management while championing the engineers. But I have a different take, and that I would argue, why did the engineers not take this further? If they were really concerned about the safety of the shuttle and safety about the crew, why would they not take it further? Why would they not go to the media? Why would they not notify the astronauts that were going up? Why did not one of the engineers approach one of the astronauts and let them know? At least it would have gave the astronauts the opportunity and the chance to decide whether they wanted to take the risks or not. But instead, they kept silent, most likely because they were all in fear of their jobs and they allowed management to bully them. However, if one of those engineers would have did the right thing, contacted the media, let the astronauts know, maybe this disaster would have never happened. And unfortunately, NASA's management attempt to maintain their budget led to the death of multiple crew members and the project being halted for multiple years, where we lost plenty of money, plenty of time, and the costs were just incredible. Whereas if one of those engineers would have done the right thing, we may have avoided the whole tragedy. And here's a quote by Nelson Mandela that states, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." So, success tip number 8 is to understand that real change takes time. Unfortunately, we live in a fast paced society that wants everything now, now, now. However, transformative change, personal or systemic, is gradual and requires a lot of persistence. So I used to work with a very gifted medical doctor that told us that one of his professors in medical school told them that whatever we're teaching you now will be wrong in 20 years. And quite frankly, that's true. And as we learn new information, then we update our knowledge and then we learn from that and we grow. It reminds me a lot of the documentary series called Connections by James Burke. And there's been several versions of this show, but basically the premise is the same, is that what James Burke does is he shows us a series of inventions that are necessary to lead on to the next invention, to the next invention, to the next invention. So it could take decades, even centuries, for things to change and get us where we need to be. But ultimately, if we continue to be persistent and we work on it, we will meet those goals. And here's a great quote by Vincent van Gogh that states, "Great things are not done by impulse, but by a series of small things brought together." Success tip number 9 here is to use storytelling to reach hearts and not just minds. Storytelling is very compelling. The notion here is that although facts inform, storytelling inspire and motivate. In the film, Nibbles Maple Sticks states, "People don't change because you tell them to. They change when they feel why it matters." So let me give you an example of how motivating storytelling can be. So let's say I want to sell you some cookies. I could tell you that these are the best cookies on the world, that they're all natural, yada, 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 and ask you to buy them. Or I could go this angle. When I was a kid and Christmas time was around the bend, I just could not wait to make cookies with my grandmother. She would start digging out the recipes, and it was just so wonderful to spend some time with her, mixing the ingredients and baking them and decorating them afterwards. And oh, that smell just permeated the room and the air for days. That just, especially the gingerbread, the that just that sweet spicy smell that just really made you think about Christmas. And even today, anytime that I smell that gingerbread, it just takes me back to that time with my grandmother. And so hey, I have my cookies here for sale, and they're the same recipe that my grandmother would make, and really think you should buy them. Which method do you think works better? And success tip number 10 is embrace complexity, because real problems are not black and white. The notion here is life is nuanced. Oversimplification creates conflict and not clarity. There's a line in the film that states, it's not about good guys and bad guys, it's about choices. And I think in our entertainment, we've seen that a lot. We've seen the evolution of entertainment. If you look back at the 50s, all of the westerns had the good guys wearing white hats and the bad guys wearing black hats. Unfortunately, life is not that simple, and there's a lot of people out there that initially look good on the surface, but have some very dark underlying motives that we need to be careful of. Now, I find that oftentimes in a lot of things in life is that the pendulum rarely stays in the middle. It either swings to the left or it swings to the right. And we've seen this happen in entertainment too. And I think it really started with Nightmare Before Christmas, where we started to see the villain is not the bad guy, but the misunderstood individual that just had some unredeeming qualities, but in reality, they were the good guy. And we've seen this in Maleficent, and more recently, we've seen this in the Wicked series. So I think we also have to be careful of falling into this trap, into thinking that everyone has a redeemable quality and that nobody's really a bad guy, that everybody's just misunderstood. And unfortunately, in real life, that is not true either. There are individuals out there that unfortunately do have very bad intentions, and they are unfortunately truly the bad guy. And we need to be careful of that as we progress through life. And here's a quote by Robert Frost that states, education is the ability to listen to almost anything without losing your temper or your self confidence. Well, that's it for tonight, folks. I hope you found it entertaining, and I hope you do find that some of these success tips are helpful to you. Please press subscribe and share this with a friend. And please check back in the next week or so for my next edition, which I'm going to do the top 10 Christmas movies and the success tips we can learn from them. Also, please check out my other channel, which is 57 Flavors, and I'll put the link to that below in the comments. And please comment below. What did you like about this video? Is there some success tips that you would add? And if there's any movies that you'd like me to cover, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you all real soon. And as usual, my prescription is try out 2 of these success tips and call me in the morning. Have a good night.